Okay. All right, moving on to item number 10 on your agendas. Have a presentation from Dave Blewett to Florida. Okay. Okay. Yep. From Florida FWC, remote salt marsh nurseries, seeking to understand one of Florida's last frontiers. The purpose of this is to share results from a recent FWC project and report investigation of sport fish nurseries and forage fish abundance in association with restoration efforts in Charlotte County. This relates to Fish, Wildlife and Habitat Protection Priority Action 2 of the CCNP to protect, restore and monitor environmentally sensitive lands and waterways, including habitat areas. Dave, over to you, please.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to stand up so I can see the screen a little better. So first off, I want to acknowledge my co-authors, Courtney, Bill, Matt, Kelly, and then a lot of other staff who put countless hours into this pretty big project. And it's a restore grant funding from Charlotte County. And I think Charlotte County got a lot of bang for their buck on this one. Just a lot of dedicated people working on this project. And today I'm gonna look at the 4 chapters of our report, and there's actually 4 chapters in our report, and the first 2 I'm going to kind of cover. And Matt Bunting covered chapter 3, which was the Tarpon immigration at the summit, and Kelly Chase he looked at chapter 4, and he also reported in the summit. This is a beautiful area. You can see that picture there. I encourage all of you to get out to these salt marsh habitats if you can. If you want to get away from people, this is the place to go. Because I guarantee you, if you go out there, you're not going to see anybody around, especially if you go in the summer. All right, so many of you have seen this before. This is just, I work for Fisheries Independent Monitoring Program, and we've got labs around the state that monitor fish populations, sport fish populations, but we collect fish, we collect all species, and we look at fish communities also. And these are some of our directives. And I'm going to focus in on the last one, which is pinpointing essential fish habitat. That's something that I've been involved with for a lot of years. And that's what this touches on. Here's kind of an idea of where we're sampling in Charlotte Harbor. This is a typical monthly sampling distribution. We're using 3 different gears: a small seine, which is about 21 meters long, a large seine that's 183 meter seine. So that's like 2 football fields long, and a small trawl to cover deeper water. And on the right, you see there's a cumulative annual effort. And so we get good coverage. And we're doing all that work out of a mullet skip, about a 20-foot mullet skip. In 2016, we expanded our sampling to cover 25 tidal creeks. We were missing the Snook nurseries. So some of our other labs, they were sampling their lower rivers, and they're more like tidal creeks, and they're catching lots of snook over the years, but we're sampling our rivers and we're not getting snook. So we expanded in 2016 through Snook state funding and focusing more on those snook nurseries. So in addition to tidal creeks, though, there are these habitats called coastal ponds. And these coastal ponds are upstream of the tidal creeks, and those you cannot sample by boat. And so these are the, we know now these areas between the tidal creeks and the coastal ponds, these are the primary snook and tarpon nurseries. So these are the places where they're growing up. There's protection in these areas because of shallow water, a lot of vegetation, and also actual marshes that are aperiodically flooded, that there's protection from larger fish predators. So these are the kind of the cul-de-sacs of your neighborhood. And just like you don't see any kids on tricycles out in I-75, you're not going to see a lot of small snook and tarpon out in the estuary. This is kind of what the habitat looks like. You've got fringing mangroves around these coastal ponds and black and white mangroves filling all these areas here. Salt flats and saltwater and saltgrass vegetation mixed in. You kind of see those different habitats right there. This is, you're going to see this picture a lot. Many of the larger tracts of this coastal salt marsh is gone. Punta Gorda Isles, Burnstone Isles, Cape Coral, etc. These were the habitats that were targeted for saltwater canals, because you didn't have to bring fill in, you didn't have to take fill out, simply. So and so right now we've got about 4 large tracts remaining in our area, and Pace Peninsula is one of the largest ones in our area. And this is a picture of 3 of the ponds in the Pace Peninsula, and it's more of the remote southern area. This is Bull Bay. This is Wigton Creek over here. And this is called Crystal Lake. This is called South Ponds. And so there are areas on the peninsula that are relatively pristine and undisturbed. This is looking to the south. This picture right here is looking to the north. Also within the peninsula, there are areas like this where we've got growing developments surrounding the wetlands. So they built on the uplands, and they left the freshwater wetlands intact and the coastal wetlands intact. And then we have areas where the freshwater wetlands and ponds have been eliminated, and now we have neighborhoods with large stormwater lakes that have direct connections to these coastal ponds and then into the tidal creeks. Our first coastal pond study was conducted at this Crystal Lake and South Ponds. This was our first opportunity to document juvenile snook and tarpon nurseries. And this all kind of happened by chance. Greg Palakis at our office, he had done his master's work in mosquito impoundments on the East Coast. And so he was very interested in finding snook nurseries in Charlotte Harbor. And he happened to do a manatee rescue, volunteer manatee rescue, and met another volunteer who had done a lot of 4-wheel driving out in this area before it became a park. And Greg said, I'm interested in nurseries. And he said, I happen to know where there's lots of snook and tarpon in these ponds. And so back then in 2003, we had did not have Google Maps and all that kind of stuff, and Google Earth. And so he became our guide, and he took us out there, and it was fantastic. And at the time, we looked at the literature. No one was studying these habitats, and especially in our area. Later on, several states, Texas and South Carolina, started to do some work. But around this time when we were there in 2003 and 2004, there really wasn't much going on in these habitats. And we were just amazed at the thousands of snook that we were catching in these ponds. And we published our findings in 2007. But we still had a lot of questions about how these ponds function as sport fish nurseries. And we thought it would be nice to know more about these nursery habitats to help guide conservation and coastal salt marsh restoration. So being that there's 60 coastal ponds on the Pace Peninsula, you know, there's a lot of questions. First off, when we studied just the sport fish, we didn't look at all the other species on this particular study. We were interested to know, are there different fish communities within different ponds? Also, as far as sport fish abundance goes, would the position of the pond in the landscape make a difference? The distance from the estuary. Also, would the connection to the estuary, the connection type to the estuary, would that make a difference? So some of these ponds have a marsh connection where the fish have to water levels either through storms. It could be a tropical storm, could be a summer storm with south winds, could be a huge massive rainstorm. Something floods the marsh, and these fish are able to get into these areas and then grow up and then get out of these areas. And so some of these ponds have a marsh connection. Some of them actually have these really narrow creek, and also mosquito ditching is whereas the long stretches of mosquito ditching or super narrow creeks, like you can't even kayak through. These are like creeks you have to walk through. So kind of our 15 years later, we're getting the opportunity to actually do what we had dreamed up back in 2003 and 4 through the Charlotte County Restore Grant. And so we were able to do a lot of reconnaissance and a lot of gear testing to try to develop this, because nobody had done a large fisheries project like this in these remote type ponds at this type of scale. And so from July 2019 through June 2022, we did seasonal sampling of 22 coastal ponds during the wet season, the transitional season, and the dry season. Excuse me, I'm going to get a drink. So these 22 coastal ponds are associated with 3 different creeks in the Pace Peninsula: Coral Creek, Catfish, and Whidden, and each have an east and west component or a branch. And what was neat about the sites that we picked was that they're at various positions in the landscape. There's varied connection types, and there's even natural and restored sites. So right over here are the restoration sites, water bodies, and all the rest of these are pretty much natural. And I do want to mention that Joellen Wilson with Bonefish Tarpon Trust has been working simultaneously in the same area as us, looking at these restored sites, and she's doing work looking at emigration of both snook and tarpon. And I know that she's going to be having some interesting information coming out from that study. And she may be able to go into more detail about the restoration sites. I'm taking more of a 10,000-foot view, looking at all of these different places. So to do this work, we had to use some different gears than what we're used to using. And I'll explain why, but we ended up choosing a 9-meter seine and a 40-meter seine to do this sampling. 9-meter seine was used in all 22 ponds, and it's ideal for collecting small juvenile snook and forage fish that are approximately 1 to 6 inches long. Here's a catch of about 40 or 50 juvenile snook from just one of these. That came in just one of these sets, and that one of these sets only covers about a 10 by 10 foot area, so it's a real small area. So the reason we chose this is because we could fit this into a large dye backpack and do all the backpacking that we needed to do across the marsh, through ditches, and then we can pull that out of the backpack, hook it up to the poles, and you can see Courtney there with the bodyboard. That's our raft that we use to set that net. And while other people are carrying water quality instruments and data books, and so there's a lot of climbing through red mangroves, and it's fun. But it's intense and takes a lot of energy. So the other gear that we chose was a 40-meter seine for collecting larger bodied fish. And this is less portable, so we couldn't use it as many places. We had about 6 natural coastal ponds that we could get it into, and it was very easy to get it into the created water bodies because they're already, we can just drive right up to those. And it's catching snook 6 to 20 inches. I'm sorry, tarpon 6 to 20 inches, and snook from like 3 to 12 inches, just roughly. And this is how we get it in. And this is all developed by our team. They just come up with great ideas. You have to have the desire to get to these places. And it's a heavy net. This net's a lot heavier than that lady. And because there's leads, these thing nets have leads, and then you get them wet and they become twice as heavy to get out. So kudos to our staff for just doing all that work and really wanting to get in there. Also, I've got this video of us setting this 40-meter seine in the ponds. Do I just hit the advance on this?
And if not, I can hit it over here.
Is there any sound?
Yeah, I can hear it here, yeah.
Nice.
Stuff in there.
Make we pull it off to the side of That's what I wanted the sound so you guys can. Look at that. There was one year in particular where the mosquitoes were just unreal. We had 2 good years and 1 really bad year. And so the bug nets, the bug jackets were a lifesaver, and they were a must. But that's the nice thing about the 40-meter seine is that it can be set way out into the water, so that the snook tend to be on the little snooks tend to be on the shorelines associated with the mangroves, so we can use a smaller net to capture those. But the snook or the tarpon can be any place. Sometimes they're swimming around the perimeter of the pond feeding along the mangroves. Sometimes they're rolling out in the middle, and so this gear was really good at capturing those tarpon. Oops. All right, so now I'm going to go through some of the 9-meter seine sampling results. Look at using the 22 coastal ponds sampled. And here's our top 10 most abundant species. And these top 4 are what we call they are the marsh stars. They're just marsh fish species, and you'll find these in a lot of different waters, but they love places like these coastal ponds. So you've got the mosquito fish, the sailfin molly. This is the rainwater killifish. This is the sheepshead minnow. And these 4 basically form the basis of the prey for our juvenile snook, which we caught a lot of juvenile snook. So you need to see the make the top 10 list, and that's 435. And so also we're doing some work with communities looking at the overall fish assemblages within these ponds and trying to see if there's certain assemblages within certain pond systems or branches of different creeks. And we're still working on that and teasing that out. We have some of that in the report, but we're still working on that, and we're going to be hopefully publishing some of that in the next year or so. And we collected a total of 54 different fish and selected invertebrates in this year through the three years. All right, so let me orient you to this graph. It's just abundance on the y-axis fish per 100 meters square. And then on the x-axis, we're looking at all of the different ponds. Here, they're broken up. You can see the different branches of each creek. And so first I want to point out, these abundances are really high. This is 10 fish per 100 meters square, and ranging from, anything from, 2 or 5 to all the way up to almost, 35. This is a really high catch rate. So we feel like we're really in the heart of the nursery here. And it's interesting that snook are very abundant in these coastal ponds that have some type of creek or ditch connection, or they have a short distance of marsh to travel over. The one exception is this east coral. This is C7, C8, and C9. These ponds have the connecting mosquito ditch, like these F1 through F3, but we did not collect even one juvenile snook there. So here's a little shot of us walking through some of these really tight, what we're calling narrow creeks. Some are mosquito ditches, and they can be anywhere from 300 to 220 meters long in distance from the open creek system, like Catfish Open Creek, we'll call the estuary, to the actual pond. And so here's the one with the question mark, the C7 through C9 study ponds. This is the area where these freshwater wetlands are gone, and now we've got the stormwater directly connecting. And so this altered hydrology, it supports exotic species like walking catfish, Mayan cichlid, blue tilapia. These are the only ponds that we go into and we see massive amounts of these exotic species. These ponds are much fresher than the other coastal ponds. Coastal ponds are supposed to be salty, especially during the dry season. They actually get hypersaline, and when they get hypersaline, those exotic species die. In these ponds, they don't die because these ponds usually get to about half seawater. They stay about like 17 to 20 parts per thousand, even in the dry season, where the other coastal ponds are averaging like 35 to 45, even 60 parts per thousand. And the snook and the tarpon are fine with that. They can handle the 60 parts per thousand. It's just the Mayan cichlids, the walking catfish, and the blue tilapia can't. So, and these fish, there's a constant source of these large fish, which are obviously competing. They're walking catfish are large predators. Mayan cichlids and blue tilapia are going to compete for space. And so another thing with the altered hydrology, these are the ones where the muck and the suspended sediments are just incredible. We don't see this in any other system. You walk in there and it looks like it's 3 inches deep, but it's actually 3 feet deep. It's just the first 3 inches are clear, and then it's just suspended particles. So that's different also. And then Kelly touched on how that may be affecting, it's not just the study ponds that we're seeing that are different. It's also the entire branch of that creek that's different than every other creek that we're studying in that region. So what's interesting too about the snook is that they are almost virtually absent from the areas where there is a long stretch of marsh to travel over. So these areas where there's like 400 to 1800 meters of marsh to travel over, they are not using those coastal ponds. Tarpon, on the other hand, they are using those coastal ponds where they're using a variety, and they're using most all of them. And so what we did with this is just simply a table showing the positive. You see that study period. During the study period, if you see a plus there, that means that a tarpon was either collected in a net or it was observed rolling while we were there. So we'll see that sometimes we don't catch them, but we'll see them rolling, and it's real easy to make an ID on those fish. So tarpon seem to use both the creek and the marsh connection type ponds. Another interesting thing I want to point out that we've been working with our Habitat and Species group, with Corey Anderson, and with some people in our St. Pete office, and we were able to get some funding to do some extra research. These guys in our Habitat and Species group are used to walking out in these marshes and studying these marshes, and they collected elevations at all of our study sites, and they also looked at habitat resistance. They came up with some really neat designs to look at habitat resistance using this board and placing it different places, and to get like different metrics. So what we want to do now, we're working with them, and we're looking at publishing a paper, just seeing what's important, like percent different elevations, percent habitat resistance, like there's basal cover, there's canopy cover. They recorded all these different things, and we were going to try to tease out, through some general linear models, what's important for tarpon and snook, for the habitats that they're crossing to get into these places. Here's the 40-meter sampling results. Remember, we're looking at 12 different sampling sites here, and the natural sites are all within the that's Catfish Creek watershed, and the created nurseries, those are in the West Coral. Here's our top 10 most abundant species, and this had, remember now that I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but this thing has a larger mesh, so it's allowing a lot of those little marsh fish to go through. So we're catching, fish that are 3 inches and larger, and really an amazing amount of snook and an amazing amount of tarpon that we're collecting. And number 1 was the striped mahara. Sorry I didn't get any pictures up there. I just kind of ran out of time on that, and I wanted to get some pictures in there. Collected a total of 30 different fish and selected invertebrates in that year. See, striped mullet made the list, tidewater mahara, Irish pompano, which is also a mahara. Who knows why they call it? It's not Irish, and it's not a pompano. It's a mahara. That's a funny one. All right, and here we're gonna. So it's that same graph again, where we've got abundance and by pond. Here's each individual water body, the 6 created water bodies, the 6 natural, and see that snook collecting a lot of snook again. Those ones with the long marsh, the 4 and the 5, F4 and 5. That's catfish. Those have the long marsh traveling, and we're not seeing many snook there. We are seeing tarpon in 4, and also a lot in 3. But so we created nurseries doing really well with snook, catching some tarpon, and here, just combining that all together. A lot of variability with our tarpon catches. Pretty consistent tarpon catches, low abundance, but they're there, they're present, and just really good snook catches in the created nurseries. So that's really neat to see, really encouraging. And like I said, Joellen will probably be presenting at some time some of her findings from those created nurseries. And then to wrap it up, this is looking at all of the data that we collected for sport fish in both gears and our visual survey. We came up with hopefully a helpful map for state and county managers, just looking at estimated abundance and just keeping it simple, like low, medium, high. And also, so there's little, the dashes represent places where we just didn't find that particular species. again, a lot of people to thank and a lot of great agencies involved around this study and so just want to give a shout out to them, and that's pretty much it.
So, I've got a question for you straight up.
Yeah.
Were you carried on that little chair thing in and out of the system?
With that.
Did you get carried on the little chair?
Oh,
in and out? Yeah, it's and
Yes.
yeah. And thanks. I had the opportunity to go out to data some of these systems as well, and yeah, I definitely think it's something that it's worth going to look at.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, we've been talking, and it'd be great to form some type of partnership where get some. I think there's some opportunities in still some more opportunities in East Branch Coral to do some restoration.
Any other questions?
Hey, just want to say great work. I hope Kelly Chase is working out for you too.
Oh, God.
He's working on his master's, right?
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. This getting out of your area down to Estero Bay. I don't know what, if anything's going on down there, but it got hammered hard by Ian. And a lot of these freshwater wet detention ponds, everything from Heritage Farms to the north, all the way down to the forest, all became flooded with salt water.
Yeah.
And they went from freshwater to now brackish systems. And what I have to tell you, my son and I, he worked at the Forest Country Club, and we would fish those ponds and catch snook and tarpon all day long. After the storm, nothing. And I'm just wondering, what do you suppose they did? Did they move further inland? I mean, these are big. These are 30-inch snook.
Yeah.
And 20-pound tarpon.
My guess is that they were looking for a way out.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, they were ready to get out, and so that was the event they needed. Some of these places, like you're talking about, some of them have ditch connection, culvert connections, or maybe it was a big storm from like a previous storm that happened a while back or whatever. But yeah, those
They got in there when they were little, grew up there. Now they're like, woo.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm good. I'll tell my son that. You want to hear from an expert.
Yeah, so I'll tell you an interesting thing is one of our staff, Manuel and myself, we went out during a tropical storm and walked through the marsh. We wanted to see what it would be like, just as far as this. It wasn't a major storm, but it wasn't Ian. But this storm had a southerly component to it that was pushing a lot of water into the harbor, and we went into one pond, and the place where like the water had pushed up way far up into the marsh, and it was just trickling now into this pond, whereas the lower ponds were flooded, but this really high up pond wasn't yet. But that water that was trickling in, there were like probably 100 tarpon swimming around that flowing little water there, and they were all the H1 fish. They were ready to get out. That's what I think. They were waiting for their opportunity. It never came on that particular event, but it did come following the following year. It was I think it was Ada. One of the storms just brought a 4-foot tide. So I think it was like a 3-foot tide that day, but it was a 4-foot tide for that particular pond that needed, they needed that to get out.
Babe, have you found any other exotics like the walking catfish or plecostomus or any other exotic species where you're seining?
Yeah, we haven't. It's those three that I mentioned. It's
tilapia, of course,
the iron, the blue, and sometimes there's a black chin tilapia also that we do catch that I didn't mention, but we're not seeing in the coastal ponds. We're not seeing or catching either one of those catfish.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you.
No jewelfish either.
We probably did catch a few jewelfish, just a few. Yeah, but not many.
So sometimes Myrtle Slough off of Shell Creek, there's a Myrtle Slough that goes really far inland, almost to Birdmont Road.
I think we talked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was
You guys-
wondering,
you
did
guys
you,
catch fish back there, right?
well, we went up and there's a
See
lake.
the big fish.
I mean, you can barely, it's a trickle most of the time, that slough, and it's very hard to even get anything up it. But eventually it just opens into a giant open water and there's giant tarpon in there. And so I'm sure the same thing with Ian, like they finally got out of there because we were like, how in the heck are they like, staying in this pond way inland?
Yeah.
But is there any study of that area of the system by any chance of like Shell Creek, Myrtle Slough?
No, I don't know of any that have been done. But it sounds like a really, really interesting system. Yeah, when you told me about it before, I was definitely interested in. Really, it sounds.
Well, it's interesting because it definitely helps us understand, how these things are all connected and how, the land use changes around these things that feel so far from the coastal areas are affecting the whole life cycle of these fish and our fisheries and these coastal ecosystems, which I think is a message we're needing to get out even more because I think people don't necessarily understand that.
Yeah, we wanted to do that whole co-production thing was great too, to bring different people together and talk about, okay, yeah, here we've got 60 some odd coastal ponds, and this right here shows just the nursery potential for the sport fish. Those red dots are hot spots for adult snook. And so we really want to keep a close tab on these nurseries and make sure, kind of do a threats assessment, what could be coming down the pike when these neighborhoods get fully developed, because right now it's mostly just grass, where these home, it's all laid out around Cape Hayes, but the houses haven't come yet. So we're hoping to, there's a potential for another grant to do some more work in Cape Hayes and on the eastern side, and to get some of the hydrological modeling done in that neighborhood, that what was it, Meadows and Villas neighborhood. That's the one where they built all the way around, the freshwater marsh and the coastal marsh.
And one more question. I mean, are those ponds, this may be kind of a stupid question, but I'm going to ask anyway. Are they fresh or are they brackish? The ones that you were studying?
Okay, yeah. So they're most of the time they're brackish or brackish to salt to hypersaline. Okay, so like in the summer, they're going to be brackish because they're getting a lot of fresh water. And then in the like the fall, they're going to be saline. They're going to be higher. They're going to be like closer to seawater. And then by what time spring comes, they're going to be like 40, 50 parts per thousand. That's much higher. 35 is seawater. So they're going to be, because they've got so much evaporation going on that, right. And so, but amazingly enough, we sample in 60 parts per thousand, and the snook and tarpon are just fine. They don't seem like they're phased by it at all.
Well, and that's where that one with the Myrtle Slough I thought was interesting because that's fresh.
Yeah, and so what you've got going there, you don't actually have a nursery. You've got like a some type of like an adult refuge, and it's a big enough habitat, and there's enough connection for those fish to either get in and out when they want, or they're getting in and staying for like it could be a year or so, until the next summer. But there may be some thermal refuge there in that lake. There may be some prey that they're going after, but there's something there. There's some reason that they want to be there.
No, that's
Might make this last one.
Generally, the natural coastal ponds are more productive nurseries than some of the protected ones. I'm just wondering with, some non-native species that could provide, like tilapia could provide a really good fish. Like some of your work on the Peace River, in their diets.
So, here's the one that's really remote. Those are the ones that we first studied, and we studied them again. And those were the ponds that had the 35 snook per 100 meter squared. So they seem to be like super duper. They're all good though. I mean, those other catch rates even those ones. So I would say, like, you know, you've got ones that are definitely impaired, and then you've got these created ones that came out really good, and these ones that are near development, but they still have their freshwater wetlands intact. Those are good. You know, so like good, and like these are just the best. You know, like they definitely, there's something about that. I don't know if it's the remoteness or not, but those ones definitely shine.
Thanks, Dave. I think we need to move on. If